Hello, and welcome to a simplified and practical approach to pursuing a zero trust architecture. If you're joining us live, our speakers are in the Slido discussion area right now answering your questions. For any audio or video issues, please click the technical support button below. I'd now like to turn it over to Soumen, Bhattacharya, and Dr. Lynette Chu for the presentation.
Yeah. Hello and welcome. And we feel extremely delighted and excited to present our approach to zero trust architecture in front of this esteemed audience. And with that being said, I'll kick off our presentation. So we call our zero trust approach a CARE model, and it's about delivering an achievable and a risk-appropriate design, commensurate with the different constraints that your companies may be having, maybe your budget constraints, your resource constraints, your timeline constraints, your existing legacy infrastructure constraints, and running business constraints. So it's a effort on having an incremental approach to zero trust and a practical approach, and while promoting a very engaging and delightful user experience. So which the same concept gives us our acronym. We're in the healthcare business. It's Conditional Access Responsible Enforcement. That's our CARE model. I wanted to take a peek on some of the reference materials that we consulted, in guiding us for our zero trust architecture approach. And at the forefront, we had the privilege of consulting the originator of the word zero trust, John Kinderberg from Forrester, and it was a privilege to get his consultation. Another model is the Gartner-Carta framework, and another model that we consulted is the Google Beyond Corp. This is very good reference material. It has a set of 5 white papers which give quite valuable information. And some other models that we consulted is Netflix LISA model, and there is a NIST publication, SP 800-207. So I would encourage the audience to consult these reference points for valuable guidance for zero trust. So this is an overarching view of our CARE architecture model. And on the left, you see an overlay of our design principles that guide us. So I will try to explain this with an example. Our user is sitting in a coffee shop trying to access a resource which is in the database. So his attempt to access is intercepted by our policy enforcement point, which consults our policy decision point, which is our central decision-making engine based on our central decision-making principle. And our decision point is in the business of crafting intelligent conditional access policies to inform the authentication and decision the authentication. So in doing so, it consults on the right, it consults the asset information, which goes towards the good object awareness principle, the device health information, the user trust score, which based on his historical behaviors, and the analytics and insight feedback systems, which is based on different IDS IPS tools, SIAM tools, different other feedback tools that we have. And we use that to make our policies more responsive and intelligent to account for all the threat vectors and threat intelligence that we can tap into. So with that, we made a judicious judgment that whether we should throw an adaptive authentication on the user, like an MFA challenge or a CAPTCHA, or just let him authenticate as usual. And then once he's authenticated, we channel that authentication for the authorization routed. We deployed the authorization enforcement point as close to the target resource as possible. So that's close to the object, and it concerns our centralized decision point, and makes a decision on that authorization. So once an authorization is given, our object is another fact is it's deployed. It's deployed in a software-defined networks microsegment, which is logically grouped as per the object grouping. So this is our overarching architecture principle, very simplified view. I will unpack our care model and discuss different tenets that we have here and building blocks we use and the learning that we had in our incremental journey. So firstly, is the foundation, and people are your trust universe. So finally, it is for the people who are first, and you do this to provide a risk-appropriate design experience to the people. By identity foundation, how do we strengthen that? So unified directory and unified access decisioning. So oftentimes in legacy companies or in big enterprise companies, we see a fragmented identity repositories and fragmented identities. We have you right, corporate active directory, corporate HR systems, corporate LDAPs, corporate databases, and this fragmented identity leads to a lot of fragmented integration points and painful maintenance, a lot of other problems. So our recommendation to consolidate your directories, to have a true directory approach, and which basically consolidates everything, and then you can offer a true single sign-on based on routing your authentication to the appropriate identity. And with that, a consolidated directory, you can open it up using the LDAP, SCIM, and the REST and SQL protocols for your applications and services. So we want to extend our unified concepts to even include the policies. And so policies need to be, we make it global, so account for all the policies that exist in your enterprise universe, authentication and authorization policies, your network access control policies, your administration plane policies, and have a global and centralized management, and have a model of flexibility in that so that you can have different granularity in that, and also you can take into account different contextual aspects like the subject, the device, the location, the network, and the target, which would be the application, the server, the service, the access is being attempted at. So that with that, another aspect, and we already have talked about intelligent policies. Another aspect is oftentimes in your identity universe, you have privilege creep and a lot of unused privileges and entitlements. So you need to have a good governance program to plug that hole, and basically build automation for your feedback and threat intelligence systems, and promote centralized monitoring so that you can detect anomalous behavior in real time, and also craft some intelligence and feedback into your conditional access policies. So when you detect the anomalies, so with that being said, once we have consolidated identity, consolidated policy management, we are in place to have a flexible access management. So once you have you detect anomalies, you make a judicious call based on your conditional access policies that these are the true positives, and then through stronger authentication like a multi-factor with offered using diverse means, and or a CAPTCHA or a step of authentication, and on a holistic policy-based access management, you want to rope in your privilege access management as well. And privilege access management, you have to handle it special care. So bring best practices from that, like credential vaulting, session recording, dual accounts, supervision and monitoring and audit, and so forth. So with this consolidated identity policy and access management, you can open this up to offer different identity and access protocols for your applications and services like SAML, OpenAuth, OAuth, OpenID Connect, and REST APIs and EAPs that we have used. So this is a consolidation and a summarization of what we just talked. In our current state or in our previous state, what we had based on different legacy constraints, different products that we had from a different time, and different other integration to support a normal running business, and how we have an improved form factor. So we had different limitations in our authorization management and our identity management. So what we have now, as opposed to disparate directories, we have consolidated directories, in a cloud-based virtual directory. And with that, we are offering standard authentication schemes, which bode well for the application and the services universe consumption. With that foundation, we are able to offer judicious and adaptive MFA, and so that we can enable access from anywhere. And what we have seen is our legacy apps, right, which were custom built and on-prem and having very nuanced and specific authentication and authorization schemes. We are able to modernize it and move them or migrate them into a cloud infrastructure. We were able to solve our we had a diverse set of Active Directory groups. We were able to normalize them and make them centrally administered, and which helped us. So fragmented, what we've seen is fragmented identities and fragmented like the groups lead to a fragmented policy management and challenges in your authorization. So this led, centralizing our administrative groups led us, have a better authorization management and a better way to launch our conditional access policies. Lastly, as I said, we made some automation in our feedback and threat intelligence systems, so we could actively monitor user behavior, take close to real-time action, and also use that feedback to take, have more intelligent conditional access policies. So that's the end of my presentation. I will hand over to my colleague and co-panelist, Dr. Lynette Chu, to take us to the remaining part of the presentation.
Thanks, Soumen. Soumen has discussed about how to build the foundation. So now let's continue the journey of unpacking our care model. In this section, we'll discuss how to build the trust boundary and how to enforce the policies around the boundaries. Let's talk about the confined trust boundary first. Historically, the shield against cybercrime has revolved against strengthening a network's perimeter in an attempt to keep attackers out. The model itself does not really take into the account of attacker kill chain and the complexity of a modern network across from on-premises, cloud, and hybrid environment. And also does not really provide sufficient protection by leaving attack surface that allowed attackers to remain undetected and leave the organization vulnerable. So here we're introducing in our care model, which is to have confined trust as the boundary. With confined trust, we can create logical segregation of the entire network, and we can tailor security settings to different types of traffic by creating policies that limit network and application flows between workloads to those that are explicitly permitted. So in this model, we could set up a policy, for example, that to allow database server can only talk to other database servers. And if a device or workload ever moves, the security policies and attributes move with it accordingly. And that's how policy becomes the boundary. The goal is to decrease the network attack surface by applying segmentation rules down all the way to workload or application. By doing so, we can reduce the risk of attacker moving from one compromised workload or application to another. And another driver is operational efficiency, because ACLs and firewall policies, they can introduce a lot of management overhead. So making policies difficult to scale in a rapidly changing environment. However, one of the big challenges with defining trust boundary is you have to know what to segment, because the effectiveness of the model depends heavily on the correct implementation of the trust boundary. Okay, so after we define the trust boundary, how are we going to enforce the policies, right? Because at the end of the day, it is the resource that we're protecting matters. In a traditional model, enforcement is typically manifested as a single proxy, firewall, or load balancer. In CARE model, we're introducing a attached enforcement proxy, because we realized the placement of the enforcement component is very important. Since it represents control point, we must ensure the enforcement components are placed as close to the resource as possible. Otherwise, the trust can pull behind the enforcement components, which undermines the entire trust security model we're introducing here. So the primary responsibilities of enforcement proxy is to interact with our unified decision engine to continuously collect the decision intelligence in order to make ongoing enforcement of the decision and whether service will be permitted or not. The beauty of our CARE model is to follow one of our design principles, which is to be mindful of dark defaults. What this means is while we implement these privileged policies, all the policies will be implemented and tested vigorously to maintain user experience without adding any burden to the organization. So now let's look at an example. So this is like a previous versus now after we started to implement our zero trust model. So previously, just like most of you, in your organization, you have a very flat and open network. And you don't really know where all of your assets are with very limited and patchy asset awareness. And we tend to have a lot of redundant and a large amount of network policy, which results in a very loose network access control. And the users typically will access your network through VPNs. Through a decentralized and inconsistent enforcement, because you have your various security controls all over the place. With everybody's moving to the cloud, we tend to have very undetected and ungoverned shadow IT environment. Also, the user can access it from non-managed device as well. With this zero trust model we're proposing, we're able to create a more segmented network. And we are able to have a more completed asset inventory, meaning, we are aware of all the assets in our environment. And we can start to implement more granular network policies, which result in a localized network access control. So the user can access it from anywhere with a protected internet exposure. In the meantime, it will only allow sanctioned applications and manage the device with also improved our network monitoring experience. Okay, so now let's talk about the last category of our CARE model, which is people. Did you know the cause of nearly 69% of data breaches is employees within the organization? That is a pretty big number, right? So we consider people as the center of the universe in CARE model. There are three things to keep in mind when we talk about people. The first is data, which is basically data associated to the employees. The second one is engagement, which is how employees engage with security. And the last one is trust profile, which reflects the security risk associated to each employee profile. So let's dive deeper into each of these aspects. Let's start with data first. What you want to do is to have a centralized, enormous data lake to store feeds from different IT systems in one place. In that way, it's easily available for access decision engine. And you also want to collect behavior, technology, and physical proximity data from your IT system, because that's what you will need for access policies. And whenever you build or buy IT system, you want to make sure they can feed data into the data lake, either by APIs or any other type of integration. So now, once you have all the security data for employees, the question is, how can you use this data to engage with employees to improve their security posture? So that's where we want to start to build an engagement portal for the employees. The security engagement portal provides actionable info to employees based on their profiles, their roles, and other factors to improve their security posture. So the engagement portal created a very nice feedback loop from employees to IT to keep the inventory updated. This resulted in a more accurate access decisions. And the overall goal of our engagement portal is to provide employee a single pane of glass reflecting their security posture. We want to make sure people to engage with security via this portal and taking necessary actions to improve their security posture. Therefore, we are going to introduce the confidence score here, to which represents the cyber risk of each employee based on their behavior and how they engage with security. So this confidence score has a somewhat same purpose as the credit score. In CARE model, we use a static data points along with confidence score to allow or deny access to protected resources. And it's very critical for access policies as it enables us to do responsible enforcement. To summarize, this confidence score will encourage people to take actions whenever needed to improve their trust profile and improve their overall security posture of the overall organization. Okay, so if you guys have tried to achieve this zero trust model, you know it's not an easy journey, right? It's not something you can achieve in the next month or even next year. So in order to reach your end state, we're proposed to take a walk, crawl, and run approach. So what we meant is during the walk phase, you want to start with, understand your environment, which means to identify where your critical assets are and understand your data flows, understand your current network technology. And in the meantime, because identity is such a critical component, you want to evaluate your identity and access control. And at the end of the day, you always want to make sure you align with your business objectives. And then as you move to the crawl phase, that's when you can start to architect your zero trust model. You always want to start small, right? With like a one small component in your environment, tend to pick something that is not very critical. And then you can start to create your segmentation security policies, and by unifying identity and access management, as what Soumen mentioned in the earlier slide. And in the meantime, you can start to focus on the people component that we talk about, which is to build this trust, right? To start to build this confidence score and build this engagement portal. And then you can move to the run state. The run state is when you start to scale the zero trust to the entire enterprise level. So you can start to apply your context or risk-based access control policies and start to enforce the segmentation security policies you created during the crawl phase, and start to verify the trust you built during the crawl phase as well, right? So you can start to decide whether user can access certain resources based on the trust score they generated. And always ensure to have secure communications, have a microservice-based design, and of course, the important part is always implement continuous login and monitoring. So at the end of the day, you want to reach to an end state, which is to have the right people with the right device in the right context, have the right level of access to the right resources through secure communication that is monitored continuously. Yeah, if you have any kind of question, feel free to ask in Slido. This will be a good time to ask. Okay, so we've introduced you with this model, and you're gonna wonder, okay, so when I walk out of this talk, what are the takeaways, right? We would recommend immediately, like next week, the most important thing is to understand your current state, right? To understand your current network topology and start to identify your critical assets and start to take the steps we identify in the cross state. And then also you want to make sure identify your distributed identity and distributed access policy stores. And then as you move to your first 3 months, and then you can start to considering unify your identity and policy store, right? And then block all the insecure protocols and start to segment your environment and start to build this trust score mechanism we discussed earlier. And then with the 6 months, you can start to adopt your localized and responsive policy design and start to provide this risk-based access based on a real-time employee score that you built earlier. So that is the end of our presentation. Feel free to leave your comments and questions, and you can reach out to both Soumen and I anytime. Thank you for your time.